India has just done something the world thought was impossible. A step so bold, so fearless, that even the most powerful nation on earth is left in shock. For years, countries have followed the same pattern, bowing to pressure, obeying invisible rules, and staying silent when told. But India chose a different path. It dared to do what no one else had the courage to attempt. This is not just another story about politics or economics. This is a story about strength, about standing firm when the world expects you to bend. And that's why you must watch closely till the very end. Because what you're about to hear is not only about a nation, it's a lesson for every single one of us. Why did India take this step? What made it defy the world's strongest power with such calm confidence? And how does this decision change the balance of power for decades to come? These are the questions we will uncover. Stay with me, because as we move forward, you will see how one decision carried a message far beyond borders. A message that loyalty is stronger than pressure and that dignity can never be bought. By the end of this video, you will understand why this moment will be remembered as a turning point in history and why it matters not just for India, but for anyone who believes in standing tall against the odds. Nations across the world often find themselves caught in the grip of powerful countries. The global atmosphere is shaped by influence, where decisions are rarely made in complete freedom. Most governments, even the ones that claim independence, hesitate when pressure comes from those who dominate the international stage. They adjust their policies, they soften their voices, and they compromise their principles to remain in favor with superpowers. This pattern has become the norm, a quiet agreement that power dictates choices, yet every now and then a nation decides not to play by those rules. India has become that nation. While many others bend under pressure, India stood its ground. It did not allow itself to be dragged into decisions that only served the interests of others. Instead, it chose a path of its own, firm, confident, and unapologetically independent. This is what makes its recent move so extraordinary. It wasn't just a policy shift. It was a statement of character, a declaration that true sovereignty is not about following orders, but about protecting your own values and interests. For decades, the global expectation was simple. Smaller or developing nations should align with the West, or at least avoid angering it. Dependence on the West for trade, technology, and even recognition created an invisible chain. Breaking free from that chain required more than economic growth. It required courage, and India displayed that courage with calm determination. By refusing to rely blindly on Western approval, India made it clear that it is no longer willing to be treated as a follower. It will cooperate, it will negotiate, but it will not surrender its right to decide for itself. This is not defiance for the sake of defiance. It is the maturity of a nation that knows its strength. A country of more than 1 billion people, with one of the fastest growing economies and a powerful military, cannot afford to live under the shadow of another's decisions. What makes this moment powerful is that India's independence was not loud or chaotic. It was quiet and steady, built on years of preparation. The world had become used to India seeking validation, but that image has now been replaced with one of confidence. By making an independent choice, India reminded the global community that partnerships should be built on respect, not dependence. This is where the real meaning of sovereignty comes alive. Sovereignty is not just a word written in constitutions. It is lived in moments like these, when a nation refuses to compromise on what it believes is right. India's choice carried more weight than speeches or declarations ever could. It showed that strength is not in shouting, but in staying firm when the world expects you to yield. Other nations watched closely. Some admired the boldness. Others worried about the example it might set. Because if India can stand up and walk its own road, then others might begin to wonder why they should always give in to the same pressures. This is how leadership is created, not through orders but through action that inspires. Breaking free from dependence is not easy. It demands resilience, preparation, and the willingness to face criticism. India knew the risks, but it also knew that the greater risk was in losing its own voice. That's why this decision is so significant. It represents a shift not just for India, but for the global order itself. A message has been sent out clearly. Independence is possible, and sovereignty is worth protecting at any cost. Standing against pressure is never easy, especially when the source of that pressure is the most powerful nation in the world. America expected compliance. It assumed India would follow the line drawn by the West just as many others have done before. The pressure came with warnings, with diplomatic signals, and with the weight of global influence. Most countries would have quietly adjusted their policies to avoid conflict. But India was different. Instead of bending, it chose to remain calm and steady. It simply said no. Not with hostility, not with anger, but with quiet confidence. This response itself carried power. It proved that India would not be dictated to, no matter how strong the opposing voice might be. The decision that shocked the world revolved around energy and trade. Energy has always been a tool of control in global politics. The West often uses it to set conditions, to determine who can buy and from whom, to punish those who resist its policies. When pressure rose to cut ties with certain suppliers, India was expected to follow. America and its allies believed India would choose alignment with them over its own national interests. But India saw the bigger picture. It understood that energy security is not a bargaining chip, it is the lifeline of a nation. So it refused to abandon trusted partners even when the pressure was intense. This move was bold, not just because it went against Western expectations, but because it displayed courage in protecting long-term stability over short-term approval. By continuing its trade in energy with those it trusted, India showed the world that loyalty and strategy matter more than temporary applause. It was a reminder that real leadership means prioritizing the needs of your own people above the demands of outsiders. The energy factor became a symbol of independence. For decades, countries tied to the West avoided any step that might displease Washington or its allies. India broke that cycle. It purchased resources where it found value and fairness, regardless of the pressure placed on it. And in doing so, it sent a message that economic sovereignty is as critical as political sovereignty. A nation cannot be strong on paper if it surrenders control of its lifelines. What stood out most was India's composure. There were no dramatic declarations. There was no attempt to provoke. It was a decision carried out with quiet firmness. India calculated its risks, weighed its options, and chose a path that made sense for its people. That is why the move surprised even the United States. It was not just the refusal that shocked them, but the way it was done without fear, without hesitation, without apology. Energy and trade are not small matters. They shape alliances, economies, and even wars. By refusing to cut ties with trusted partners, India safeguarded its future. It avoided falling into the trap of overdependence on one bloc of nations. It kept its options open, ensuring balance in its global relations. This balance is what gives India power. A country that can trade freely and buy freely is a country that cannot be easily controlled. The world took notice. Smaller nations, often forced into one-sided deals, saw hope in India's stand. If India could say no to America's expectations, perhaps they too could resist. This ripple effect is what makes India's choice historic. It was not just about one trade deal or one source of energy. It was about rewriting the rules of how nations respond to pressure. America realized something important in that moment. India cannot be pushed into submission. The old methods of control do not work on a country that has built both confidence and capability. Standing against pressure requires more than words. It requires backbone, and India proved it has exactly that. By protecting its energy ties, by placing its people first, and by refusing to bow, India reshaped the narrative of global power with a single decision. Global reaction came quickly. Allies of America were stunned by India's refusal to comply. They had grown used to nations falling in line whenever Washington spoke, and India's calm rejection broke that expectation. Some governments whispered their disapproval, worried that such defiance might encourage others to do the same. Others kept silent, watching carefully, because they knew a shift was taking place before their eyes. The shock was not only in what India did, but in how it did it, without aggression, without drama, only with a steady firmness that could not be ignored. For smaller nations, the picture looked entirely different. Many of them saw India's action as a breath of fresh air, a sign of courage in a world where most voices are silenced by pressure. These nations have long faced choices that were not truly choices at all. Either they aligned with the powerful or they risked punishment in the form of sanctions or isolation. India showed that there was another way. By refusing to abandon its own interests, it proved that survival does not depend on constant approval from the West. This message gave smaller countries hope, because if India could resist and still thrive, perhaps they too could stand up for their people without being crushed. India's decision carried weight far beyond the immediate issue of trade or energy. It was symbolic. It declared that loyalty and national interest come first, and outside approval comes last. This was a radical shift in the narrative, because the world had become accustomed to applause-seeking behavior. Most governments act in ways that win them temporary praise from powerful nations, even if those actions damage their own citizens in the long run. India turned that logic upside down. It reminded everyone that real leadership is about protecting your people, not entertaining outsiders. The calmness with which India handled the situation amplified its strength. Strength is often mistaken for loud declarations, threats, or dramatic gestures. But true strength lies in quiet confidence, the ability to say no without raising your voice. That is exactly what India displayed. It didn't challenge America with arrogance. It didn't insult its allies. It simply stood by its decision, made its move, and carried on. That quiet confidence shook the global order more than anger ever could. Around the world, analysts, leaders, and ordinary citizens began to discuss this new posture. Was India setting itself apart from the old system? Was it showing the world a model of how to resist without being reckless? These questions spread because people realized that something bigger than trade was unfolding. A shift in mindset was underway. India was no longer seen as a follower trying to earn a seat at the table. It was now a voice that could not be silenced, a power that chose when and how to engage. For the allies of America, this meant reassessing their own positions. They understood that if India could resist, then the balance of power might be shifting faster than they had calculated. For smaller nations, it meant inspiration, a reminder that the world is not unchangeable. For global citizens, it was a lesson in dignity, showing that strength does not always wear the face of aggression. Sometimes it wears the face of calm resolve. In the end, India's message to the world was clear. No nation is truly independent if it makes choices only to please others. Sovereignty is measured by the ability to walk your own path, even when others try to block it. That is what India proved in this moment. It taught that calmness is not weakness, and that silence in the face of pressure can sometimes be louder than words. By prioritizing loyalty and national interest over foreign approval, India not only changed its own image, but also redefined what strength looks like in the modern world. Economic backbone is what separates nations that bend from those that stand tall. India's economy gave it the power to resist pressure at a time when many expected it to yield. For decades, economic weakness was used as leverage against developing countries. Threats of sanctions, loss of trade benefits, or financial isolation were enough to force compliance. But India's story is different now. Rising growth has transformed its position. It no longer fears sanctions or external threats in the same way. With a strong domestic market, expanding industries, and an increasing role in global trade, India has created a shield that protects it from outside intimidation. The world is watching one of the fastest growing economies, driven by technology, innovation, and human capital. India has positioned itself as not just a participant in the global system, but as a key driver of it. This growth is not fragile. It is rooted in diversity, from agriculture to services, from manufacturing to digital technology. India has built a foundation wide enough to withstand shocks. That is why attempts to pressure India economically no longer have the same effect. The old tactics of using trade or finance as weapons don't work as easily on a country that has become a global hub of opportunity. This economic confidence feeds directly into political strength. A nation with growth on its side can make decisions based on long-term interests rather than short-term survival. India knows this. It understands that its rising influence is not accidental but earned through years of persistence. And that confidence is what allowed it to say no when the West demanded compliance. Without this backbone, the refusal would have been unthinkable. Alongside the economy stands another pillar: military confidence. India has invested for years in building modern defense systems that match its growing role on the global stage. The days when India was seen as a soft target are gone. Today, it commands respect as a nation that can defend its borders and secure its people. Advanced technology, strategic partnerships, and indigenous development have created an armed force that is no longer dependent on a single power for its security. This independence gives India the freedom to make bold choices. America realized this shift. In earlier times, pressure was backed by the unspoken assumption that resistance could invite instability or vulnerability. But now the equation is different. India's military strength ensures that it cannot be pushed around. Its defense capabilities, both conventional and strategic, send a message that it is fully capable of protecting itself. This balance of power changes the way others approach it. They may disagree with its decisions, but they cannot dismiss them. Economic power and military confidence together create a shield of sovereignty. One without the other leaves a nation exposed. Economic growth without defense makes a country wealthy but vulnerable. Defense without economic strength makes a country strong but unstable. India has managed to build both, and that combination is what makes its refusal so impactful. It did not reject pressure recklessly. It rejected it with the calm assurance of a nation that knows it has the means to stand on its own. The impact of this confidence is global. Other nations take note when a rising power shows that independence is possible. Smaller states realize that with growth and preparation, they too can resist being dictated to. Larger powers recognize that the world has changed, and old methods of control must be rethought. For India, this is not just about protecting its present. It is about shaping a future where decisions are guided by national interest, not external fear. America, perhaps more than anyone else, has understood this new reality. India is no longer a country it can push around. It is no longer a nation that responds to pressure with compromise. Instead, it is a force that weighs its options, makes its choices, and stands by them with confidence. This is the new India, an economy that cannot be threatened, a military that cannot be ignored, and a voice that cannot be silenced. The soft power angle is often underestimated, yet it plays a vital role in shaping how nations are seen and heard. India's cultural and diplomatic influence adds weight to its decisions in ways that raw military or economic might cannot. This is a country with a heritage that stretches back thousands of years, a civilization that has touched art, science, philosophy, and spirituality across the globe. Its culture is not confined to its borders. It flows naturally into every corner of the world, from yoga to cinema, from cuisine to literature. India's presence is deeply felt. This soft power makes its voice louder because it carries respect and familiarity. When India speaks, the world listens. It listens not only because of India's size or population, but because its words are backed by cultural trust and diplomatic credibility. Over the years, India has built relationships with countries across regions, often serving as a bridge between the East and the West, the North and the South. Unlike some powers that rely on fear or coercion, India has relied on dialogue, shared values, and cultural exchange. This is why its bold steps resonate more widely. A nation seen as a partner, not an enforcer, has the ability to inspire others rather than intimidate them. This diplomatic credibility is not an accident. It comes from consistent efforts in peacekeeping, in cooperation, and in standing for principles that many smaller nations identify with. India has supported causes of independence, development, and fairness, which makes its voice one of reassurance. When such a country chooses independence for itself, the example carries greater weight. It tells the world that sovereignty is not only for the powerful, it is a right that belongs to all. The impact on global balance is clear. India's bold step shakes the old power order in ways that are both symbolic and practical. For decades, the world order revolved around a handful of dominant nations dictating the flow of politics and trade. Smaller nations followed, often reluctantly, but with India choosing its own path, the pattern begins to crack. It shows that even within a system designed to favor a few, there is room for resistance and independence. That realization changes the way countries see themselves and their possibilities. This shift also redefines leadership. Nations now look at India as more than just a regional player. They see it as a leader of independence, a country willing to stand firm where others hesitate. Leadership is not always about being the strongest in force. Sometimes it is about being the first to step into new ground, creating a path for others to follow. That is what India achieved in this moment. It became the voice of courage for those who lacked one. The old power order thrives on predictability. When nations can be predicted, they can be controlled. India disrupted that cycle. It showed unpredictability in a calculated way, proving that it cannot be boxed into a single narrative or block. That disruption creates new possibilities, forcing powerful nations to rethink strategies and smaller ones to reconsider their choices. Balance begins to shift when even one major player refuses to play by the same rules. At the same time, India's example is not reckless. It does not advocate chaos. Instead, it advocates fairness, respect, and sovereignty. This is why its actions do not create fear, but admiration. When nations witness boldness combined with responsibility, they gain confidence in aligning with such leadership. They know that standing with India means standing with a country that values dignity over domination. In every global forum, in every negotiation, the perception of India now carries more weight. Its cultural depth, diplomatic ties, and calm confidence combine into a form of power that goes beyond missiles and markets. This is soft power at its strongest, shaping minds, inspiring nations, and influencing choices without force. And with this power, India has positioned itself not just as a participant in global affairs, but as a shaper of the new order. Lesson for smaller nations lies at the heart of India's bold decision. For too long, many countries have lived under the shadow of powerful states, believing that resistance was impossible. The common idea was that saying no to pressure would invite disaster, sanctions, isolation, or worse. But India broke this illusion. By calmly standing its ground, it proved that saying no is not only possible, but also powerful. This was not an act of defiance for the sake of pride. It was a demonstration of sovereignty, a reminder that every nation has the right to make choices based on its own interests. Smaller nations often feel trapped. Their economies may be dependent on aid or trade agreements. Their security may rely on alliances with larger powers. This dependency makes them think that compliance is the only safe path. India's example challenges this mindset. It shows that independence is not reserved for the biggest players. It begins with courage and clarity of purpose. The message is simple yet strong. When you protect your own people's needs above outside approval, you earn respect even from those who tried to control you. India's decision did not come without risk, but that is exactly why it carries weight. The world saw that even under pressure from America, India stayed firm and still maintained its position in global affairs. The feared backlash did not destroy its economy. The isolation never came. Instead, the refusal highlighted India's growing influence. For smaller nations watching closely, this lesson is priceless. It tells them that threats are often weaker than they appear, and that dignity can sometimes shield a nation more effectively than compromise. What stands out is the manner in which India said no. It wasn't aggressive, nor was it reckless. The refusal was measured, calm, and logical. This is a lesson smaller nations can apply. Resistance does not have to mean hostility. It can mean standing by your decisions with clarity and confidence. When done this way, even the strongest powers are forced to adjust their expectations. Respect is earned not by loud defiance, but by firm, consistent choices. India's example also encourages smaller countries to rethink their strategies. Instead of aligning blindly with one bloc or another, they can diversify their partnerships, protect their sovereignty, and reduce vulnerability. Dependence is the real weakness. Independence, even if partial, gives a nation leverage. The courage to say no is not just about rejecting demands. It is about creating space to breathe, to choose, and to grow. This lesson matters even more in today's interconnected world. Smaller nations play critical roles in trade, in resources, and in global stability. Yet too often they undervalue their own importance. India's stance is a wake-up call, reminding them that their decisions carry weight. If they act with confidence, they can shape negotiations rather than simply endure them. If they prioritize national interest, they can build a stronger voice in global discussions. The psychological shift is perhaps the greatest impact. For years, the mindset has been one of submission. We cannot afford to resist. India has shattered that thought. It showed that a calm no backed by preparation can rewrite the narrative. Other countries now realize that compliance is not the only option. There is another path, more difficult perhaps, but more rewarding in the long run. In the end, the lesson for smaller nations is not about copying India's decisions exactly, but about embracing the principle behind them. Every nation has unique needs, unique strengths, and unique challenges. What matters is the willingness to protect sovereignty, to make choices without fear, and to put dignity above approval. India's example proves that such a stance is not a fantasy. It is real, it is possible, and it is powerful. India's move is not just about politics. It is about dignity, courage in rewriting the global rules that have long favored a few and silenced the rest. In one calm decision, India showed the world that true power does not come from submission. It comes from standing firm, even when pressure is at its peak. This is a lesson not only for nations, but also for individuals. When you protect your values, when you refuse to bend for approval, you earn respect that cannot be taken away. The world will remember this moment as more than a policy choice. It is a turning point, a reminder that sovereignty is real only when it is defended with courage. And just as India stood tall, every one of us can draw strength from its example to walk our own path, to make our own choices, and to value dignity above fear. If this message inspired you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. More powerful stories and insights are waiting for you, and together we will continue exploring the lessons that shape not only nations but our own lives.